Welcome to another Hawkeye with me, Dave O'Hara. Pleased to be joining you this week again. Sean Bock will be joining us as he usually does throughout the football and basketball seasons. Sean, of course, as you know, all 6 years on this program has been with me throughout, and Sean covers the Iowa Hawkeyes for basketball and football for 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports. Sean, beat writer for the Hawks. Sean, I kind of hesitate in the show open. Tough one again. After Oregon, now a tough loss at USC 26-21. Again, the Hawks had chances, Hawks had opportunities, and you want the game in your hands, but no moral victories here. Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us, and give me some of your takeaways from what might have been in California last weekend.
Yeah, I mean that if that game doesn't sum up the whole season, I don't know what does. Yes, you have a big lead. That wasn't the case in some of your other losses. You got down against Oregon, you got down against Indiana, you got down against Iowa State. But man, like that one kind of just felt like it was honestly the perfect storm. And I think I don't know if I said on this show, I might have said it on our show, the Stormcast, where I was like, or it might have been just been talking to friends. I just go, it would be the most Iowa thing to lose that game to Oregon and then come back and just absolutely boat race USC, win out the rest of the regular season, and then be that 13th team in the college football playoff rankings. So you just miss it. But that's obviously not going to be the case, or very unlikely going to be the case. Now that you lose to USC, you're sitting at 6-4, and start to think to yourself, is this one of the best 6-4 teams in the country? Probably, but that doesn't really mean anything for you right now because you're out of the college football playoff contention, and now you got to play it for a bowl game and play for pride at this point. Which for Iowa, that's one of the programs, especially even in this day and age, college football, where they're going to play for pride. Like they're going to play for the name on the front of the jersey. They're going to play to finish out the year strong and finish what they started, and that's going to be the case to close out the year. But man, you just look back at some of these losses. Those four plays go a different direction. What are we like? This is a completely different season potentially. That's the catch, the Iowa State catch on that deflected pass on 3rd and long. It's the missed screen pass by Hank Brown on third, or was that 4th down or 3rd down? 3rd down against Indiana, and then the Dante Moore catch or pass that set up the field goal, and then the Caden Weechin where he looked like he was in, and Caden Weechin said it today too. He said, "I thought I was in. I mean, I saw my toe drag like inbounds, like I saw the print afterwards, but guess it wasn't good enough for the officials." And I don't want to say like the whole game was like the game was not decided by the officials. Yes, I know a lot of people are frustrated by some of the officiating, some of the missed calls, that face mask, that blatant face mask, some of the holds, some of the things that were missed. But you had opportunities to win that game. You had opportunities to run away with that game, and you weren't able to do that. That's really the story in this one. And you can't put yourself in a situation where you have to have the officials save you. I'm not saying that's what people are blaming it on, but man, like some of those calls too, you kind of like, what the heck is happening? But you can't put yourself in a position to have, those calls decide the game. And, that's ultimately what Iowa did, despite having that big lead early on and not being able to put their foot on the gas or foot on the opponent's throat. So frustrating loss. That's probably one of those ones that stings the most, especially because you had that game won, or at least you had a really big advantage early on. So it's going to be interesting to see how this team responds. I mean, with a pretty not so good Michigan State team coming in, you would kind of expect Iowa to put, you know, foot to the gas and just absolutely dominate. But we'll see what team comes out.
Hawks right now 6-4 overall, 4-3 in the Big Ten. Saturday, a 2:30 kickoff, senior day at Kinnick Stadium on FS1. As we record this on Tuesday afternoon, November 18th. And Sean, a quick news to note, and we'll move on. But for the rest of the show, Sean and I are going to talk football through this first segment, second segment, men's and women's basketball for the Hawkeyes. And then closing out, give you a look into the future. We have the recruiting expert on all the time, and Sean Bock here for 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports. Hawks got some big commitments and signings for basketball and football, so we're going to talk about that in the third and final segment. But James Franklin, Sean, a quick note, obviously unceremoniously and very publicly got pushed out the door at Penn State, and now is the new head coach at Virginia Tech starting next year. So that'll be interesting to see what happens. Replacing his former defensive coordinator who left Penn State, went to Virginia Tech, got fired earlier this year, and now James Franklin going to Virginia Tech. More buyout talk, Sean. It's like LSU with Brian Kelly. They can't decide how much to pay and who and what. And now, by taking this Virginia Tech job, Franklin is lessening the amount he'll get paid from Penn State. But, Sean, we talk about press availability and media availability, and you said it perfectly. You can't blame it on the officials specifically, but there were some, I'll be kind and say questionable calls, like you said. But it is what it is. The Hawks have a loss. And as we mentioned, now you got to move on to Michigan State. 2 games left. One more after this Michigan State game will be at Nebraska on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, in Nebraska, in Lincoln. And then if you can go 8-4, 6-3 in the Big Ten, get a New Year's Day-ish bowl, not all is lost.
It's still a good team. Like I think you can hold your head up high saying that it's still a really good team, but it just didn't really have that ability to get over the top, and that's what's most frustrating about these trends with Kirk Ferentz the last couple of years and some of his teams is they just haven't really been able to get up to that, get over the top at that point.
Let's you and I close out this segment, Sean, talking football here about upcoming Michigan State. You wrote great volumes and coverage and takeaways. What Michigan State has and hasn't. Not a good year for Michigan State. So this is a chance for the Hawkeyes. You don't want to overlook anybody, but a chance on Senior Day to go out. Logan Jones got emotional at USC in the presser after the game about playing his last game at Kinnick Stadium and playing his second to last, or he'll play in the bowl game. So it's not his penultimate game, but I guess it'd be his third to last game if he stays healthy and plays against Nebraska and then the bowl game. But talk a little bit about your thoughts on what's upcoming the Hawks face against Michigan State, please, Sean.
Yeah, this Michigan State team, I mean, they won 3 in a row to start the year, but really their best win, I think at the top of my head, is against Boston College, who's been not good this year. And I mean, Michigan State's had a couple chances to win games. I mean, they had Nebraska on the ropes. They had Minnesota on the ropes. Granted, I mean, I don't know. I mean, not saying those teams are not better than Iowa, but they're not. I think Iowa's a better team than both of them. But those were also home or road games too for Michigan State. So they are a decent team. They can put some scares into you. But I think if Iowa was able to run the football effectively and get to the quarterback, I think it's really not going to be an issue for this team. And I think the mindset going into this game too is, hey, we want to dominate because we've seen what's happened the last couple games. We've seen how we've been on the short end of the stick, and we want to come in and dominate. And it'll be interesting to see how that quarterback situation for Michigan State pans out too, because Aiden Chillis missed the last game with an injury. He was the one that kind of had his best game of the year, had one of his better games of the year last year against Iowa. They had another quarterback that's come in. I believe his name is Alicio I can't say his last name. It's a little bit of a tough last name to pronounce, but this Michigan State team has some pieces. They have some pieces that they can put things together. And I mean, it was kind of where they kind of struggle though is in the line of scrimmage. Their offensive line is one of the worst in the Big Ten, if not the worst in the Big Ten. Defensive line is decent. Linebackers are pretty good. Linebackers are leading tacklers, highest graded guys on Pro Football Focus. So they're not a bad team, but they just haven't been able to win games, and they're obviously below average. But I think there are some ways that they can kind of frustrate Iowa in some ways, and make this one a little more interesting than it needs to be. But I think Iowa has the pretty clear matchup advantage if they can play what they're capable of.
Great analysis from you as always, Sean. Thank you so much. We'll pause here and come back, and we'll close out the show for 2 more segments. Sean and I will talk Hawkeye men's and women's basketball, and then we'll close out talking recruiting for the Hawkeye athletic programs, primarily football and men's basketball. He's Sean Bock, beat writer for the Iowa Hawkeyes, covering them for CBS Sports 24/7 Sports. You see Sean's logo there on his lapel there. Sean, we'll be right back with more Hawkeye. I'm Dave O'Hara. Back with more in just a few moments.
Hawkeye is brought to you by BettorEdge, your ultimate social betting marketplace. With no VIG, you're bound to win more on every bet on BettorEdge. Founded by Hawkeye alum James Siles and proud Iowan Greg Kieski, BettorEdge delivers an unmatched betting experience. Plus, what's not to love when they're committed to supporting charities and children's hospitals near you? Join the action now. Sign up at bettoredge.com/Hawkeye and get $10 to start winning more today. BettorEdge, where your social betting means your bets go further and you win more.
Welcome back to Hawkeye. I'm Dave O'Hara. Pleased to be joined by Sean Bock for the whole show today. Sean, of course, as you know, has joined us throughout this program over the years. Sean with CBS Sports 24/7 Sports covers the Hawkeyes. For the women, I want to talk Hawkeye men's basketball. Ben McCollum and crew 3-0, really getting after it, Sean. But competition will ratchet up next week when they go out to California. But before this show airs, the Hawks play tonight as we record this on Tuesday afternoon, November 18th. The Hawks play Cover Hawkeye Arena against Southeast Missouri State. And then they play Thursday against Chicago State. So both games, Carver Hawkeye, will be played before this show airs. And then we'll update you next week when we record. Going into Thanksgiving week, the Hawks go out to California, Palm Springs, to play a couple of games. So, Sean, give me your takeaways. What are your thoughts on how Ben McCollum and his guys are looking right now at 3-0?
Yeah, I mean the big difference. I mean, I know Iowa fans are kind of used to an efficient offense, but I think it's more so with those numbers. It's because those Fran McCaffrey teams played so fast. But with these Ben McCollum teams, you've really seen some of the efficient numbers. I mean, three through games, they're sixth in the country in effective field goal percentage, 45th in 3-point field goal percentage, second at 2-point field goal percentage, and 50th in free throw percentage. The turnovers have been a little bit of a frustrating trend, but they've been getting to the free throw line pretty effectively too. That's been a really positive trait. But one of the things that I really like about this team, I mean, you talk about Bennett Sturts and the way that he's been able to play and just how like fortunate Iowa is to have a point guard like Bennett Sturts who's just so good at controlling the pace of the game, controlling the speed of the game, just playing within the flow of the game and, kind of dictating things. But also, I thought the game against Xavier, there was a lot more balance with this group. And that's, I think, one thing that people were kind of missing in in those first two games is yes, they had some guys that had some pretty positive moments, but I thought, having six guys who I think it's six guys who scored 8 points or more or 10 points or more, one of those stats, I think it was 8 points or more. That's a really positive thing. Especially because it felt like at times, and that's going to be the case with Sturts, that it felt like Iowa was relying on him a lot to initiate offense and get offense going and to create something in some of those games, especially against Western Illinois. But to see that there was more balance, and especially guys like Alvaro Fulgaris, that's probably been the most positive development to start the season, is Alvaro being the guy that he is and being efficient coming off the bench on both offense and defense. I mean, he's been able to get into passing lanes. He's been able to create steals, turnovers. He's rebounded the ball really well. Offensively, he's been able to score. He's also been a really good passer and connector. That's one thing that Iowa really wanted him to be coming into this season. And, he's been able to fulfill all that. And I know there was some concerns at times, throughout the offseason with some of his play. And, for him to be able to show that efficiency and that much poise this early in the season, coming off the bench too, that's a really welcome sign. And one of the big things too that you're going to see with this Iowa team is efficient shots. I mean, nowadays all we talk about is taking good shots in college basketball. And what are those good shots? Those are at the rim. Those are from three. None of the mid-range stuff. And I think they're taking 83 or 84% of their shots are at the rim or at three or from three. That's a really good trend because there were some times with the last couple of years where, they kind of settle for some of these weird mid-range looks, but this team doesn't really seem to be doing that. And that's something that I think has been a really positive with this group too. And defensively, they've been solid. I mean, they haven't been perfect. They've kind of, left shooters open from time to time. There've been some confusion in terms of communication with ball screens and, different coverages and whatnot. And, sometimes in transition. But I think for the most part, the defense and defensive rebounding too has kind of been a struggle here and there. It improved against Xavier for sure. But those are kind of been the big, spots on defense that have been a little bit concerning. But overall, like everything's been pretty solid, I think, for the most part. And, it's hard to have complaints this early on in the year. And it's nice to see Iowa take care of business in these games too.
And it's interesting, Sean, to see the attendance go up each game. Of course, Xavier was their better competition so far this year in the three games, but all three games at Carver and about almost 10,000 the first game, almost 10,500 the second game, and now almost 11,000 against Xavier. So it'll be interesting to see how the attendance, if it continues to improve as the competition ratchets it up. Of course, both the men's and women's teams play Iowa State upcoming, and then the women, of course, we transitioned in from talking about the men's team to the women's team. It's interesting to see at 4-0. Now they jumped up from 21 in the AP now to 19th ranked. And after beating UNI this last weekend handily, talk about defense. That was some defense there. They held Northern Iowa to 41 points, 74-41 win. I was at the McLeod Center in Cedar Falls and a near record or record attendance crowd there for UNI. So the Hawkeye women just continue to roll on. And we got to start with Layla Hayes.
With Layla Hayes too, I think a lot of people kind of thought that she would maybe just play spot minutes this year behind Hannah Stolke and and Ayla Hayden, but to see her kind of really come into her own, that it's nice when you're 6'5". Like that makes a big difference in women's basketball because there's not many girls that are at your size and are and have the skill that she has. And Chit Chat right too. I mean, she had a really productive game against you and I as well. And I think that's one piece that a lot of people had question marks coming into this year because while Layla Hayes is 6'5", Chit Chat Wright's 5'4". And having kind of that smaller lead guard who's not necessarily a scorer like Iowa has had the last couple of years, I think people were a little concerned about that and how the adjustment would be. And I know that's something that Jan Jensen really talked about a lot this offseason too, is kind of that adjustment to having a guard like Chit Chat Wright. So to have her be as productive as she's been and as efficient as she's been, and then some of these surprises too, like I said, Layla Hayes and Addie Deal's still trying to come into her own a little bit.
The Hawk women, they go to Florida this week and play in a kind of a mini tournament, I guess, kind of like the Hawk men next week during Thanksgiving week. When I mentioned they go to California, Palm Springs, and play in kind of a mini tournament, so to speak. The Hawk women, before this show airs, will play number 7th ranked Baylor in Florida in a little tourney, as I mentioned, and then they play Saturday against Miami of Florida down there when they're in Florida. So a couple of good competition for both Hawkeye men and women upcoming. And then, of course, they get into both Big Ten. Both teams will play Big Ten games, a couple of them before the new year. But they still got to play Iowa State. Both teams do yet, too. So, Sean, this schedule gets serious and for real upcoming very quickly for both teams, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, not only for the women's, I mean, you have Baylor, Miami, and then you have Iowa State, and then you also have UConn on the 20th of December. So that's going to be a really interesting test for this team and is really going to prime them for Big Ten play.
When we talk about UConn, I didn't get to that game yet, and I'm going to get to it the closer we get to it, like you said, on December 20th. But they're number 1 in the country right now, and will probably be by the time the Hawkeyes play them, the women, in a couple of weeks. And then you talk about Iowa State is up number 12 now in the AP. And, of course, I mentioned Baylor at number 7. So, yeah, their competition ratchets up pretty quick, too. So let's you and I take a pause here. We'll come back for our last segment and talk some Hawkeye recruiting. But there he is, folks, Sean Bock, recruiting specialist, but also a beat writer for covering the Iowa Hawkeyes for 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports. I'm Dave O'Hara with Hawkeye. We'll be back with more in just a few moments.
Hi, this is Joe Merschman from Merschman Seeds. Substitutions cost you money. Why take their seconds when you can have our first choice? Here's Ben Paper to tell you more about Merschman Power Core Enlist Corn.
We are way ahead of Big Seed on this one. This corn has 4 different post-herbicide tolerances, multiple modes of action for above-ground pests, and it is some of the highest yielding corn genetics that are out on the market today.
If you're one of the many that got substituted on your corn hybrid last spring, contact your local Merschman Seeds dealer today and ask them about Power Core Enlist Corn. From Merschman Seeds, your friend in the field.
Welcome back to Hawkeye with me, Dave O'Hara. Sean Bock joining us throughout the whole show. So thanks to Sean for hitting us with all 3 segments, talking Hawkeye football, Hawkeye men's and women's basketball, and now we're going to close out talking recruiting. Sean, the recruiting specialist. So, Sean, some big signings for basketball. Number 1 for Ben McCollum and his crew. Of course, we've documented the women who they've signed. Lichko, the top 6th, I believe, recruit in the country. Hawk signed her couple of weeks ago, got the commitment and the signature. So we've covered Hawkeye women's basketball commitments and signings and recruitings already. So let's talk men's basketball. And there are 3 specific commitments in football I want to talk to you about, but there's some other guys on the periphery as well that may be making a commitment. So let's start with Ben McCollum and basketball first, please, Sean.
Yeah, Ethan Harris was a really nice win for Iowa, the state of Washington. That's not necessarily a state that the Iowa is known for recruiting, and the Hawkeyes were able to go in there and beat out Washington and Gonzaga, especially Gonzaga, for a kid from the state of Washington. That's a pretty good victory. But he fits the mold of exactly what Iowa wants in kind of their hybrid 3-4s. Ethan can shoot the ball really well. He's got good size. He's really athletic. Can put the ball on the floor. Rebounds well. And the big thing that McCollum mentioned yesterday was that he has defensive versatility. That's probably the one thing that separates him right now. And I know a lot of people are talking about Trey Thompson. When is Trey Thompson going to make his debut? Like, Trey Thompson's a pretty highly sought after recruit. Yes, he's reclassifying, but where Ethan probably has that edge right now over Trey is more so on the defensive end of the floor. I think, yes, Ethan's a good offensive player, but I think Trey is a little more developed there. But I think Ethan could probably, give you more on the defensive end early in his career at Iowa. And, it kind of also, speaks volumes to the way that Iowa has recruited some of these hybrid positions because you kind of not necessarily have a logjam, but you got a lot of younger guys who can kind of play similar positions. Cooper Koch, Tate Sage, Trey Thompson, now Ethan Harris. It kind of goes to show, like, you think about if this was the last, regime's roster. There's kind of a logjam there of guys who play the same position. But with this system and this setup, these guys play off each other really well, I think. Like their skill sets really complement each other well. And I think that's going to, be a really nice piece for this Iowa, with the future of this Iowa basketball program. But now you got to get some guards and you got to get a true five too. I know they really like Trevin Urek. I know Cam Manyao's got one more year, but you got to get some guards once Bennett Sturts is gone.
And that's only 1 year they have Bennett Sturts. So that is an imminent need, as you mentioned, starting next year. So let's talk some football. Big recruits coming in. Of course, football is all the buzz right now because we're in football season and we're in that transition season. We're also in the early basketball season. So I know a lot of people, again, after the last couple of tough losses against top-ranked teams or at least top 20 ranked teams in Oregon, top 10 ranked team, and then USC. So people are saying, well, Dave, what's the future look like for Hawkeye football? And I thought, who better than Sean Bock to talk about that? And interestingly enough, there was a commitment on Saturday right before kickoff. He made his commitment. And then a couple other ones, one in state. You might mention reclassifying and coming in early from Trey Thompson for basketball. Same thing happened for football now. So let's talk about three of these guys, a wide receiver also coming in now. So let's talk about those specifically and anybody else you want to mention, Sean, please.
Yeah, the first one, Trayton Messenger, the four-star composite quarterback out of Utah, actually happened before the Oregon game. So he took his official visit to Iowa, and there was some talk of him. He was going to go visit BYU. That was the plan. Obviously, Iowa was able to flip him from Boise State, but I think really like what sold him was kind of just the progression of the offense because you see the potential with this offense in the passing game. And if you can get comfortable in the system, you can get comfortable in with what Tim Lester's preaching and how you can fit in that offense. That's gonna be a really good step for you because Mark Kanowski has shown promise, but he's only been in the offense for not even a year, like not even close, like half a year. So if you can develop and if you can, have develop upside in that system and develop production in that system, like you're going to be in a good spot or you're going to be in a much better spot than you were a couple years ago. And Messenger's got good size to him. He's got good arm. He's pretty mobile too. He's pretty accurate. There are a lot of really intriguing pieces with him that I think will make him a really interesting quarterback down the line for Iowa. And I'm not saying early snaps, but who knows after this regime with guys like Hank Brown and Jeremy Hecklinski, what it could be like. I mean, I could potentially see him competing for a spot in his second year, depending on, how things go with him. Then Luke Brewer out of Norwalk, the three-star tight end, who's actually a four-star composite tight end, is a pretty big body tight end, really athletic, really productive kid coming out of high school, has always kind of been one of the bigger kids. And, you kind of like are a little nervous when that happens because you don't know how they're going to develop. But I think Luke has that skill set where he can continue to kind of progress himself pretty well. And I think that sets him up really well for what he could potentially be in Iowa. And I know a lot of people talk about Iowa not using the tight ends with Tim Lester's offense. I just think it's because they don't really have the tight ends this year that, they've had in the past. Yes, we saw them be used more against USC and Oregon. DJ Vanami had a number of pretty big catches. So did Hayden Large. But I think as Iowa gets more talent in that room and you start to see those guys really start to fit more, then, the tight end room is going to be in a really good spot. And getting Brewer was huge. That was a really nice win for this class. And then Xavier Stinson, honestly, I didn't know Iowa was going to try and go get another receiver in this class because they already have two in Brody Schaefer and DeAndre Smith until they really started going after Stinson, who was a former UCLA commit. He's another big body receiver, could really fit in at that X position. Really athletic, really good ball skills, really smart player, can make plays after the catch, has really good size and athletic intangibles to him. He's going to be a really fun prospect to watch down the line. And I think that really kind of just goes to show the uptick in talent that they potentially have at the wide receiver position. They just need to develop these guys and, kind of mold them.
So skill position players, quarterback, tight end from the Des Moines area or Norwalk, as you mentioned, and then wide receiver, a big body wide receiver. That's fantastic. So 3 big commits from football for Iowa, and then, of course, Ethan Harris, as you mentioned, for Ben McCollum in basketball. And Sean will have more updates as we go throughout the year. I don't want to overload you folks, as we just talked about McKenna Velisco for the Hawkeye women a couple weeks ago when she committed. So a lot going on. Stars coming to Iowa City, Sean. It continues and continues. Great stuff from you, as always, folks. There he is, Sean Bock, beat writer covering the Iowa Hawkeyes, but also recruiting specialist for 24/7 Sports, CBS Sports. Sean, it is always a pleasure. I thank you so much for taking extra time today to join us for the whole show. It's great to see you again, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, sounds good, Dave. Thank you for having me, as always.
Truly my pleasure. So for Sean Bock, I'm Dave O'Hara. Thanks also to Greg Kajewski and James Stiles at BettorEdge and BettorEdge.com, my production partners. That's all from us at Hawkeye. Thanks to all of you.